Good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly webcast where I will take you through some of the latest news and offer you some views on what's going on in the world of motorcycling out there. It's show number 324. It's Wednesday the 12th of April, and right now it's a beautiful sunny day out there, although I see cloud building from the west. More on that at the end of the show, actually. So what have we got for you in today's news? Well, a fair amount of news actually about the police. The police are deploying drones to focus on speeding motorcycles in the southwest of England. A row has developed in Thames Valley over some moped riders who were stopped for wearing jogging bottoms. Sadly, a serving police rider has actually been killed off duty on his own machine. Islington is under fire for the stealth introduction of powered two-wheeler parking charges in their bike bays. And we'll ask if a new Norton 650 twin is in the works, because there's some interesting news out of India which could bear on that particular story. And Suzuki has moved to what they call service activated warranties. I'll explain what they're about, why they could be an advantage to some riders, and why they could be a disadvantage to others. And the final story is that likelihood is that London will actually be hosting a criterium-style race for e-bicycles, but the FIM, the Fédération Internationale de Motocyclisme, the governing body of motorcycle sport in the world, has actually set the event up. And I'll explain why that is. And then finally, today's discussion point: is it really the time to start calling for the end of the smart motorway? Well, I would call an experiment. So settle yourselves down, grab yourself a brew, and be with me for the next 30 plus minutes as I run through all those stories. As I say, quite a lot to get on with today. Now, first thing to actually say is that due to a bit of a cock up on my part, I'll be perfectly honest and say, yeah, my fault. The live online event for April has had to be rescheduled once again, and the reason for this is actually that I completely forgot that after today's show I'm off down to Kent this evening because I have a presentation to deliver down there tomorrow. So obviously I'm not going to be home tonight in front of the computer delivering what was planned to be the talk on sports psychology and how we can use it in riding. So that's had to be put off for another week, so it will be April the 19th now, and all being well, disasters aside, I should be available for that one. So do join me for that one. Now, just in case you're wondering, sports psychology is an interdisciplinary science that draws on knowledge from many related fields. It's been used for many decades in sport, obviously, and since riding a motorcycle is kind of a sporting event, and riding isn't all about technical ability, it is actually very important to understand how our mental abilities are what allows us to use practical riding skills to the best advantage, and that's where understanding some of the techniques from sports psychology really can give us an advantage. So during the talk I will come up with some simple and easy to use routines straight from the science of sports to help you get your head in the right place, get your race face on, as people talk about. So don't forget that goes out on my tiny HQ. The booking is here, just in case you haven't got there already. Do come along, we've got some seats left still. Okay, and so yeah, Terry's looked in and says morning, and I say good evening to Terry, nice to see you, and Paul's here as well. Hello Paul, nice to see you too. Right, okay, next thing to talk about very briefly is that for subscribers and supporters, if you've ever bought me a coffee over on my coffee page, then there is an ebook that you can download, and yes, it is free. You should have got an email invite to download it, but if you haven't, or you've lost it in the spam filter or just deleted it without reading it, and I know some people do that, just head over to the shop section of my coffee page, and if you look, there is a subscribers and supporters tab. Just click on that and you'll find the ebook and you can download it there. It's basically a self-help guide. It's a way of self-assessing, and it'll give you some questions which will help you evaluate your riding, your skills, your knowledge, and your attitudes. And if you do want a copy, and you're not a supporter or subscriber, you can get it too just by buying me a coffee over on my archive page. Final bit of news, there is a heat wave, a mini heat wave I should say anyway. In other words, the weather will be warming up something more like normal for London, forecast for the middle of next week, and I am relaunching my on-bike training sessions, so that is good news. I do have a few other things in the fire at the moment as well, so I'm reasonably busy, but yeah, if you're interested in a practical course and you've been waiting for the warm weather, now wouldn't be a bad time to talk about it. So, and of course if you're too far away, why not drop me a line about some online coaching? I can always run a session for you online. Kevin's looked in. Nice to see you as well, Kevin. Right, okay, so what have we got in the news? Well, we have a series of events, and here's the first one. This is a view from a drone, and the story is about watching the skies, basically, because Devon and Cornwall police are, to quote their press release, using drones to spot dangerous motorists, as their drone unit has linked up with the roads policing team to, as they put it, protect vulnerable road users by tracking speeds and detecting criminal behaviour. So this is the sort of thing that they'll actually be using. Now, for motorists and vulnerable road users, read motorcyclists. It's a statement then continued. We will be deploying this technology on roads where we know motorbikes are travelling too fast, and also around dates and locations where motorcycle events are scheduled to take place. So take that as a warning. You will be monitored from remote. That's Devon and Cornwall. Now, Chief Inspector Ben Asprey, he's the head of roads policing at Devon and Cornwall, he said, sadly last year was a terrible year for serious and fatal collisions involving motorcyclists. In 2022, 16 motorcyclists were killed on Devon and Cornwall's roads, the highest figure in the past 5 years. A further 187 were also left seriously injured. Okay, I've talked many times, of course, about the dangers of taking a short baseline to get a headline figure and to try to actually put those in perspective. If you think about it, of course, we had a couple of years disrupted by COVID in the middle of that period. But one thing he did say, and this is a point I make for myself on a fairly regular basis, many of these serious collisions don't involve other road users, and he said that meant inappropriate riding and motorcyclist error being major factors. Now, the drones can track vehicle speeds on stretches of roads. They can video incidents, which means, of course, you can be caught dangerous riding on camera, and they'll also be able to remotely check your MOT, tax and insurance status of any vehicles, which basically means they can also spot stolen bikes, which won't be a bad thing. But unless the drones have capabilities that I'm not aware of, I fail to see how they are going to allow offenders to, quote, potentially even be arrested on the spot, not by an aerial vehicle. They won't. I suppose they can put a roadblock up further away. Inspector Colin Harper, he's from the drone team itself, he added, this technology can and will be used to detect speeding and dangerous driving on all vehicles on the roads, and he again reaffirmed, at present our focus is on motorcyclists who are highest risk according to our data, particularly at this time of year when more riders will be venturing out again after the winter. So if you want to blow the cobwebs away, think carefully how you do that. The Force announced the project as part of the National Motorcycle Safety Week, which, if you missed it, as you probably did, it was last week, the 3rd to the 9th of April. As it happens, Devon and Cornwall aren't the only force switching to drone power. Lincolnshire Police have deployed their own drones over 80 times in January 2023. No data for the next couple of months, however. Now, okay, police do get a hard time sometimes when it comes to policing motorcycling, but over in Thames Valley they have been getting some stick because they pulled up too riders on mopeds. Now, the PC, whose name has not been released, he apparently spotted a group of youths out on scooters and decided that since two of them were wearing tracksuit bottoms, he'd stop them to talk about their attire, since he apparently felt it necessary to warn them about their lack of protective clothing. But having pulled them up, he then discovered they smelled of cannabis. They were required to take a drug wipe test, which they failed. A spokesman for Thames Valley Police said the pair were, quote, taken into custody where blood samples have been obtained. Both riders now face a ban if over the drug drive limit. Now, not surprisingly, there's been a bit of a backlash, but Thames Valley do seem to be determined to support the officer, pointing out the grave dangers, quote, associated with biking without the proper clothing. Now, frankly, if they'd stopped someone carrying a child in a t-shirt and shorts on the motorway at 70 miles an hour, I would have said they had a good case. But since mopeds have a top speed of 28 miles an hour, a speed regularly exceeded by sporting cyclists rather, and I really doubt they're out there regularly pulling up groups from cycling clubs because they are out on a training run in some flimsy looking lycra. I honestly feel that this is actually not a justified pull. The spokesman, though, said that in this instance we've stopped two young riders at the start of their adult lives hurting themselves or others whilst riding under the influence of drugs. Of course, the trouble is they only became aware of the drugs issue because the riders were stopped due to the PC's alleged concern about their clothing. Now, if the riders had been stopped because they were suspected of being under the influence of drink or drugs, then fair enough, but that's clearly not the case. And I'd be really interested to know what section of UK law they were stopped under, since helmets aside, of course, there is no law compelling motorcyclists of any size on any size of bike to actually wear protective motorcycle clothing. So, at the risk of delving back into grim ancient history, this reminds me a little of the old SOBS laws, which were used extensively in the late 70s and early 80s to stop members of the black and ethnic populations under suspicion of them being in breach of Section 4 of the Vagrancy Act that dated from the 19th century. It was so controversial, it was thought to have contributed to, at least been a factor in some of the race riots that happened at the time, and it was repealed in 1981. It'd be really rather disappointing if that kind of law has somehow resurfaced. What have we got to say here? Kevin says, I'd be interested to see if there are any successful prosecutions for excess speed solely using drone footage. Well, you can certainly be nicked from a helicopter, can't you? So I don't suppose that drones will be excluded. I mean, presumably they'll be calibrated somehow, but anyway. Yes, he says if the defendants plead not guilty, yes. Police have the power to stop a motor vehicle on a road, full stop, says Kevin. Yeah, okay. However, I think that's something that we have to be careful exploiting in the way that's just been done. Anyway, back in London, the frustration over the implementation of parking charges for powered two-wheelers, and as I keep saying, what happens in London will spread out to the outlying towns and cities. It's now Islington that's under fire, and motorcyclists are said to have reacted in shock after they have been fined for parking in bays that were previously free. So here is a photograph of the sort of thing that we're talking about. Islington Council introduced a new charge of £1 a day in motorcycle bays earlier this year. Stories variously describe it as January or February. I don't know precisely which one it was, but there was apparently no warning of the changes. So the Save London Motorcycling Campaign Group says that riders have been parking in bays unaware that payment was now necessary, even though they've been parking there regularly. And so fines of £80 have been dropping through riders' post boxes for parking in their normal spot. One rider said he had no idea there were charges coming into effect, and, quote, it's unfair to expect the public to be aware of completely new charges for something that used to be free with no warning. Well, I suppose it really depends on how obvious the signing is. Now, in the picture in front of you, if you look carefully, you can actually see the sign there which says that parking is charged, and it tells you the number that you have to phone. Whilst I guess if you continually, you have parked there on a daily basis, you may not spot that sign. It is one of those questions about, really, were you on the ball when you parked there? Anyway, the point is that a Freedom of Information request reported in the Islington Gazette showed that no less than 1,200 motorcyclists have so far been issued with a penalty charge notice for parking without payment in 2023, whereas for the last year it was just 320. So clearly there are a lot of riders who have been caught out by this. Now, after protests, the council has agreed to remove the £1 a day charge for Islington residents who have actually got a motorcycle parking permit for the borough. That already costs £61 a year. So if you have a short commute across Islington and you want to park in a parking bay and you do have a permit for your residence bay, then you don't have to pay. But frankly, how many motorcyclists actually park in residence bays? Don't know. Council say the move is to encourage a reduction in non-essential motorcycle use, although as with the Hackney debacle, many of the people using and parking motorcycles will be making essential journeys to do things like get to work. And using a PTW is using a generally less polluting form of vehicle, which creates less congestion. So frankly, it's a bit of a non-starter, that argument, in my opinion. The problem, of course, is that parking was usually free for motorcycles, not because anybody wanted to let them park for free. Westminster went to pay to park decades ago, but it was because of the difficulty of displaying a paper ticket on a vehicle like a motorcycle. But with app-based parking systems, and you could see a number on the sign I blew up there, there's no longer any problem bringing motorcycles and scooters into the pay to park scheme. Now, that's tacitly admitted by the council, who said the new £1 daily charge for dedicated motorcycle parking bays for visitors ensures we have a consistent approach across all types of on-street parking and aligns them with our policy for other motor vehicles across the borough. Fair enough, I say, but yeah, could have done it a little bit more sensitively. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you want to catch this show, you will find it going out every Wednesday and Sunday, almost always live, occasionally recorded, and very, very rarely I have to miss a show for other reasons. So make a date and come back, and don't, of course, forget to tell your buddies about it as well. Hopefully we can spread the word a little bit more. I know Terry's been doing his bit recently down under. Now, here is a motorcycle story. Are we about to see a brand new 650 Norton twin in the next couple of years? Now, I think it could well be possible, and here's why. Now, as you probably recall, Norton was rescued from financial collapse by the Indian motorcycle manufacturer TVS Motor Company. Now, according to recent statements, very recent statements by the company head, who's Vimal Sombly, TVS is planning to launch what were described as fresh premium products in the 2023-2024 fiscal year, featuring what was described as advanced technology and high performance capabilities. Now, it looks like there will be a pair of new single-cylinder 310cc machines. Now, it's known that those are based on the BMW motor from the G310R, and that one of those is likely to be a sort of an adventure bike styled to compete with Royal Enfield's Himalayan. But the word is that there's also likely to be a brand new 650 twin in the works, which could well be designed to produce 47 horsepower, which would then allow it to compete head-on with Royal Enfield's own 650 twins. Now, that's obviously important in the Indian market, and here's where the Norton connection comes in. You may recall that Norton released information, and here are a picture of the bikes, back in the Stuart Garner information, about their range of 650 engine bikes, the Norton Atlas, and there would be two models, the Ranger and the Nomad, and these were revealed as far back as October 2019 in pre-production format. Those actually look pretty much ready to go to market to me, but anyway, as TVS got to grips with taking over, paying off the debts, getting the company up and running and fixing the V4, these models were cancelled in October last year. Now at the time, the Norton CEO, Dr. Robert Henschel, he said in a statement, over the last 2 years, our passion and focus has been to develop a brand new range of Norton motorcycles that will deliver into the modern era. As such, we've now confirmed there are no plans to produce the Atlas range in the near future. Now that was a disappointment because a number of people had actually put down a deposit on these new 650s, and the backstory on the 650 twin cylinder engine is quite interesting. The motor was essentially 2 cylinders lopped off the 1200 V4. Now it was developed by Ricardo and engineering specialist Ricardo, and it was designed, as we said, for several different bikes. In the Atlas pair, it was designed in 84 horsepower format, and these were said to be the affordable motorcycles in the Norton range. Now outside of those two machines, there was also a high power 105 horsepower variant, a super light sports bike. It seemed a bit unlikely that they'd managed to squeeze that power out of it, but 3 bikes did appear in the lightweight class at the 2019 TT, one of which finished 8th in the hands of Peter Hickman. And finally, there would have been a range-topping carbon fibre framed super light SS 170 horsepower machine. But back in 2017, a deal was done by Norton to allow the motor to be produced in China under a design and license deal with Zhongshen. Now that would have allowed the Chinese manufacturer to locally produce and use the engine in its motorcycles. But as Norton ran into deeper and deeper financial trouble, the entire engine design was apparently sold off to Zhongshen. And so the slightly detuned motor, producing around 70 horsepower, duly appeared in the Cyclone RX-6 back in May last year. I featured that on the show. So back to Norton. When TVS got Norton back up and running, the original plan seems to have been for Zhongshen to build the motors and supply them back to Norton to build into finished bikes. That's fairly clear because, as I say, the revitalised firm was registering customer interest in the Atlas model, so there were clear intentions to get the bike on sale. So what fell through? Well, I speculated at the time it could be one or more of the following. That possibly the priority to develop an electric bike had taken precedence. Maybe the premium Norton brand didn't want to be associated with a made in China engine, even if it is their own design. Zhongshen could have been asking too much for the motor, or TVS planned to source a motor from India to bring the supply line back in-house. Now, the news that TVS are actually looking at creating their own 650 twin, plus rumours that a European company are developing the motor, suggests they could well be using the development work undertaken by Norton those years ago to produce the new motor. Now, presumably there will have to be some changes to avoid it being a straight clone of the Ghana Norton design that was sold to Zhongshen. It'd be a bit of a sort of role reversal, wouldn't it, for a company to actually have to change the design and not straight do a clone of a Chinese motor. It's usually been the other way around. And it would, of course, be significantly detuned if the motor produces 47 horsepower. But I don't think that that suggestion of output is an accident, because it would make the bike license compatible in Europe. There are reports that suggest BMW could be behind the motor, but it's hard to see where they'll get an engine from, frankly. They've got their long-running 650 single, but this is said to be a twin. And then there's a big gap in the BMW range up to the F750 GS, which is actually an 850 motor. So if they were to build a 650 twin for TVS, it would have to be either a completely new design or a shrunk 850. Now, with Norton part of the TVS empire, and given there are no TVS motorcycles in Europe or the UK, badging the machine as a Norton for the Euro market, which would then take on BSA and Royal Enfield, who already have 650s on sale here, would make a lot of sense, particularly as a lower spec bike could come in at a much lower, more competitive price point than the V4. So I guess the question really is this: do TVS want to continue to see very, very limited sales at the very top end of the market with the Norton V4, or do they want to shift the company towards sales in greater volume? I'll be interested in your thoughts on that one. Terry says that he thinks 650 bikes seem to hit a sweet spot between small and larger capacity. Yeah, I would agree. Actually, I would think I've often thought that something between 600 800 cc is about ideal for a motorcycle. Anything smaller can run out of puff. Anything bigger tends to get a bit unwieldy. No, you have no doubt people will have their own views on that one. Right. Okay. One other quick poster up there. Don't forget, if you want to support Elevenses, I'm more than happy for you to do so. You get access to hundreds of better biking articles, getting on for 1,000 I think now, for the price of a cuppa. If you head over to my www.coffee no, it's not slash, it's a hyphen you can read it for yourself there, and see what's available. There's plenty of free stuff to look at, and if you like it, what you're looking at, or you enjoy the show, drop me a coffee. I much appreciate it, and it helps me keep producing new shows. It does take me quite a long time to put one of these shows together. Alright, okay, now I've always wondered why it is that motorcycle manufacturers seem to have so little faith in their products that their warranties are so short. After all, many motorcycles only do about 3,000 miles a year, so even when the standard warranty lasts 3 years, are they really so unsure of their product that they really expect them to go pop after less than 10,000 miles, and so won't cover them for defects that occur after that date? I don't know, but it seems that Suzuki have finally decided to put their warranty where their mouth is by launching a new service activated warranty. Now, here's how it works. When the motorcycle reaches the end of its manufacturer warranty period of 3 years, the service activated warranty is activated, oddly enough, when it gets its next scheduled service within the Suzuki dealer network. So each time the bike's serviced under the schedule, the warranty is simply renewed again up to the next service and to a maximum vehicle age of 7 years or 70,000 miles, whichever comes first. Now, what's the warranty cover? It's said to cover all major components. It's said to be transferable to a new owner if the machine is sold, even if the original warranty is expired. Then there's a gap in the service history. If you go to a Suzuki dealership, have the what's called a Suzuki motorcycle health check and a service, then should the machine be up to scratch, it'll benefit from a freshly activated warranty. So, on the plus side, the service activated warranty is offered to customers completely free of charge, and hopefully it will make your machine more attractive to second-hand purchasers too. On the minus side, the terms obviously do require that you get the motorcycle serviced. It means you have to take it to an authorized Suzuki dealer, and of course if you do a lot of miles, then the cost can soon add up, because quality, genuine replacement parts tend to be used, are more expensive than even quality pattern parts. So if you're the type of owner who's happy to pay for the peace of mind, then it could make a lot of sense. But if you are on a sort of less expensive motorcycle and you're putting a lot of miles on it, the chances are the money you'll spend on regularly servicing will buy yourself a new bike. But anyway, hey ho. Suzuki say that it's unique. I certainly think it is, and they're proud to offer it to their customers. And of course, it does mean that Suzuki are trying to keep some added value from the brand to their dealers. Now, right now, of course, Suzuki have a very distinct lack of model range here in the UK, and ongoing poor sales too. So that can't be encouraging for anyone trying to run a dealership. Now, quite a few episodes of Elevenses back, I was talking about the problems of defining electrically propelled bicycles and whether they should be classified as motorcycles or cycles. Now, motorcycling groups actually made a very strong case for managing them as powered two-wheelers, and their case could be strengthened by a brand new e-bike racing series called the EBK this summer. Now, interestingly, and this is what I was referring to earlier, it's organised by the Fédération Internationale de Motocyclisme, which is the FIM, and they are the governing body and sanctioning body for all motorcycle racing globally. London is set to host these races, and what they would do is mix electrical power with muscle power. The format has not been revealed yet, but it's expected to be what's known as a criterium event in the cycling world, which takes place on a closed urban circuit. So you lap a single circuit over a number of times. And it's expected that 30 male, 30 female riders will be split into 10 teams. They'll compete against their own gender. And it's being reported that riders will be using de-restricted e-bikes made by a Swiss company called BMC. And the battery capable of powering the bike will apparently deliver enough energy for about half the race. So I guess there'll be some strategy involved over at which point you feed the electric power in. The rounds are expected to last about 45 minutes. Now, speaking to the newspaper Cycling Weekly, three-time Olympic champion and EBK ambassador Ed Clancy said, "I've always liked crit racing. It's about how we manage the battery power and how to integrate that with human performance. We've got another element to it now. We're going to have a finite amount of battery power for these races, so we're going to have to be thinking carefully about where we deploy it." And he said that it could result in the development of apps which would in fact help ordinary riders factor in where to best use the energy to support them on a ride to cope with distance and terrain. Now the final date's expected to be announced in the coming weeks, so it's quite an interesting series, I think, because as I said, it does show that the motorcycling world is actually looking at the powered cycles and hoping, I think, that they can bring them in under the motorcycling umbrella. Right, okay, so on to today's discussion point. I know this will be a bit controversial with some people, but the question I'm asking is it time to admit that smart motorways aren't safe but are actually dangerous? Now, a coroner recently looked at a crash which killed two people, Derek Jacobs, 83, and Charles Scripps, 78, and he said quite clearly that the accident would not have happened had there been a hard shoulder. Now let's just remind you of what a smart motorway looks like, in case you have been living under a rock and you've missed out on that. There is a section of smart motorway, and as you can see, all the lanes have running traffic on them, and you have a refuge there for broken down vehicles. Now the problem is that these refuges are can be very much further apart than the original M6 pilot scheme, where they were pretty close together. And what happened here was that Mr. Jacobs was driving his van. He got a blowout in his tyre and he stopped in the live inside lane, and this happened on the M1 near Sheffield in March 2019. Now before he could make it to safety, the van was hit by a Ford car. Mr. Scripps was the front seat passenger in that vehicle and died in hospital 2 months after the collision. The collision was actually caught on dash cam footage flipping over the car, and it ended up on its side before it was hit by a coach. Now it transpires that Mr. Jacobs' van was stationary in the live lane for 3 minutes and 34 seconds before it was actually hit. Now, giving evidence on Wednesday, collision investigator Sergeant Paul Moorcroft said it's highly unlikely this collision would have taken place had there been a hard shoulder. And he said that the vehicle was stopped 500 metres short of the next emergency refuge. Let's just remind you what they look like. There's the emergency refuge in front of you, and it was about a mile from a service area where he could have pulled off altogether. Now, concluding that both men had died as a result of a road traffic collision, Assistant Coroner Susan Evans told the Coroner's Court in Chesterfield, "Smart motorways are hugely controversial because of the lack of any hard shoulder for motorists to use in times of need, such as occurred here. It's immediately apparent that had there been a hard shoulder, this incident would not have occurred because Mr. Jacobs would have been able to pull off the live lane entirely." Now, the circumstances are sad because it appears that Mr. Jacobs have actually got most of his van out of the road. There was only about 65 centimetres of it protruding into the carriageway, but nevertheless it was struck by the Ford, which apparently could have passed it. And Miss Evans, the coroner, said it's evident Mrs. Scripps simply did not see the stationary van before she collided with it. And she did add that there are many roads in the road network, including dual carriageway A roads, that are subject to the national speed limit and do not have the benefit of the hard shoulder. However, that doesn't mean, of course, that you shouldn't have them where they can be installed. Now, Simon Boyle, he's the Regional Director for National Highways in Yorkshire and the North East, he told the inquest that the technology that can detect stationary vehicles was not installed on this stretch of the M1 at the time of the collision, and it's since been fitted. He also admitted there'd been human error in the control room after a member of the public actually reported the stationary van just 44 seconds after it stopped. And he said this human error was responsible for the warning signs not being deployed until 8 minutes after the call. And he said the average is around 2 minutes 15 seconds. Mr. Boyle said, I don't believe you can fully eradicate human error. Unfortunately, humans operating and mistakes are going to be made. Now, I've talked about the safe systems approach to roads in the past, and frankly, the safe systems roads says that you build roads in such a way as humans can't make errors. So, you know, I would say this is blaming humans for making mistakes which the system isn't set up correctly to prevent. Now, whether Mr. Jacobs could have driven on to the next refuge or not, I don't know. Whether he was getting out of his van at the time of the collision, I don't know, or whether Mrs. Scripps' failure to see the vehicle head was down to inattention, as was claimed. Clearly, they're trying to lay the blame here on other people, but look at the facts. You know, the lack of a hard shoulder left the stranded vehicle projecting onto the roadway. The late deployment of the signs meant there was no warning to Mrs. Scripps or the coach driver in advance of the collision, and for that matter, it didn't warn any of the other drivers that approached the crash site. Now, I have no idea how many would have passed for fully 5 minutes before the collision actually occurred. Those drivers' safety depended on other individuals successfully negotiating a system which left them in danger. So saying that Mrs. Scripps was the driver responsible for the collision through lack of attention, I think shows a failure to appreciate or a dismissal of the difficulties in identifying a stationary vehicle amongst other traffic on a fast road. It's really surprisingly difficult to pick that up until you're right on top of it, simply because of the rate of change of size. It's really small when you're a long way away, and it doesn't suddenly expand in your view until you're really close, and that sort of surprise can cause people to freeze. So I think they're blaming people here for a genuine human problem. Anyway, and you know, and again, the same to be blaming the staff in the control room is shifting responsibility away from the inadequacies of a system which didn't actually have automatic vehicle detection in time. Now, how bad are the control rooms? Well, it was quite alarming because the BBC also had a programme just recently where a journalist went undercover and got a job with National Highways, and her report, which you can find on this particular show, BBC Play there, around about 53 minutes into the show, there's this short section where she said that she went into the control room and got a job there, and she was horrified to discover that many of the CCTV cameras, which we expect to be monitoring the road and which the highways people tell us will identify and pinpoint broken down vehicles, all those involved in collisions, were out of action or pointing in the wrong direction. So yeah, have a listen. I think it's appalling. Now, the collision itself, I've just talked about, it was one of 3 that had happened on a 10-mile stretch of the M1 near Sheffield, all resulting in fatal collisions. In June 2019, Jason Mercer and Alexandru Maganu, they were killed when they were hit by a lorry on the M1 after they stopped on the inside lane after a minor collision. And the Sheffield coroner then, David Erpeth, he decided that Mr. Mercer and Mr. Maganu were actually unlawfully killed. And he said, I find as a finding of fact, it is clear a lack of hard shoulder contributed to this tragedy. And in 2018, a woman died after she got out the passenger side of a car just as it was hit by another vehicle. And Mr. Mercer's wife Claire made a good point. She said, the hard shoulder was just always there and didn't make mistakes, and we've replaced it with something which isn't always there and does make mistakes. And that was a conscious decision. They have designed danger into a smart motorway, and I can't help but agree. Now, on that comment about other roads having no hard shoulder, as if that's some kind of excuse for not using on motorways. Back in February, I mentioned that I came across a stationary car and truck on the near side lane of the M1 on a section of smart motorway. I had no idea how long they'd been there, but I had no warning from the signs. Yet at other times, I'd passed locations where the signs were flashing away, telling me there was a closed lane with no sign of any stopped vehicle. So I really think you can't rely on the signs. And of course, had I been following another HGV and had that HGV swung out at the last moment to avoid those stopped cars, I wouldn't have seen them as early as I did. So I agree that a hard shoulder isn't a safe place to be, as many people like to remind me. Collisions do occur on them, but the live lane, stopping in the live lane, really is not a choice I would have to make. So, saying that motorways are just like dual carriageways is really not a defence for removing the safer refuge of the hard shoulder. And I do speak here from personal experience. Now, I had to stop on the live inside lane of a dual carriageway a dozen or so years ago. I managed to get all but around 18 inches of the car. It was a Mazda 6, so a fairly average saloon, off the road. So not dissimilar to the crash we just heard about, in fact. And I had just got out the car and I was walking in front of it to get myself into a safer position, because I didn't want to be sat in a car stuck on a live running lane either, when it was actually hit from behind by a driver who hadn't seen it. Now, I was showered in broken glass. I was very lucky the car didn't move very much under impact. My partner, who had just opened the boot to get the warning triangle out and to take it back down the road, had to jump to the side. I reckoned we had been stopped no more than 30 seconds. And I would say that under the current designs, none of the safety systems put in place by National Highways or anybody else can deal with that kind of incident. And with the traffic density on the road, these crashes are going to happen before the warnings can come on. Now, National Highways Chief Executive Nick Harris, he said it's vitally important to learn lessons from every road traffic collision, and we will continue to build on the work and safety improvements already underway, taking all necessary steps to help drivers and passengers feel safe. Well, I certainly don't feel safe these days on smart motorways. So will his lesson include considering scrapping smart motorways? I'd like to think so. I'd like to think it's an option that's being seriously considered for all the right reasons, but I doubt it for political ones. A lot of money and time has been invested in telling us smart motorways are safe. It's going to take a bit of a sea change to overturn that, even though I think it's long overdue. Right, okay, a couple of comments here. Kevin says he despises smart motorways, but do wonder why we aren't similar issues on non-hard-shouldered 70-mile-per-hour dual carriageways. Well, as I said, Kevin, there are. However, there are lots of reasons that traffic probably has fewer collisions on those kind of roads. For starters, you can generally turn off a dual carriageway at fairly short notice. There are usually quite a few side turnings. Traffic generally tends to be moving a little bit more slowly. I can think of a number of reasons, but yeah, they're not safe. But certainly with the density and speed of traffic on motorways, I think the lack of a hard shoulder is a real flaw. Right, anyway, that's it for today. The show's been a bit longer than planned again, but a lot of interesting stuff, I hope, for today for you. Anything else to say? Not really, except just a reminder of the weather. Be a little bit careful if you're out there today. The lovely weather we're having at the moment isn't right across the country. It's snowed up in the Cairngorms. There's been wintry showers in the north of England, and the cold front, which is sweeping across the rest of the country, will bring strong winds to coastal areas, Irish Sea coast, southwest of England, south coast. As the day goes on, it will get seriously windy this afternoon. There is a weather warning out, so if you're being seduced in the south of England by the blue skies to go out on your bike, just be aware that things will turn grim later on today. Right, that is it from me. Thank you once again for looking in. I always appreciate your presence on these shows, and I do hope that you have enjoyed today's 11s. Do tell your mates about it, and hopefully I'll see you and a few of your friends ready for the next one.